TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us, Jeff Mostyn, the man that saved AFC Bournemouth.
Thank you so much.
Firstly, Jeff, I just wanted to ask you, how did the book come about, and how long has the whole process taken from start to publication?
Okay, so the book was a very interesting project that coincided with me stepping down as chairman of the football club. And I think I needed something, pretty cathartic after 17 years at the helm. The club, the supporters in particular, the staff, players, and my family. And yeah, it was like almost a bereavement of a kind. I know that sounds rather dramatic, but I was so intensely involved and associated with everybody at the club. Suddenly, almost overnight, to walk away was very difficult. But every time I've done any public speaking, whether it's speaking with you today, whether it's addressing a big audience, whether it's television or radio in the UK, the United States, at the end of every presentation, if we call it that, people have said, normally the person that's interviewing me or members of the audience, Jeff, you have to write a book. This is one of the greatest stories ever told. And of course, they're referring, predominantly to what I still believe is one of the greatest football stories ever told, taking the football club from minus 17 points in Division 2 through to the Premier League, where economically the club had almost died twice, once when I bought it and secondly with the famous Gerald Krasner moment. So that's how it came about. Then the opportunity, I talk very much in the book about sliding door moments, both in my life and in football. And a sliding door moment for me came in more or less 2 years ago, November 2023. I was a keynote speaker at the Women's Global Football Conference in Athens. And I met a young man there called Ed Bowers, who I believe was 30 at the time, a prolific podcaster, so like you guys. And he was also one of the moderators at the conference. He'd heard I had an interest in writing a book and said, I'm here to help if you need any help. So he became my book manager, along with the one and only, for me, Mr. Bournemouth, Neil Vacher. And Neil has had a major contribution in all the football elements of the book. His knowledge as the club historian, for instance, people say to me, when you played Manchester City the first time, everybody seems to home in on Man City, knowing that I've been a lifetime supporter and born and bred in Manchester. When you played them at the Etihad, what was the score? I always go for 5-0 because normally that's what it was in the past. And he'll say, no, it was 5-1. There were 47,810 people here, and here's their names and addresses. So rather than me hazard a guess at whatever the score was. And between the three of us, we've put together what I think is a really compelling read from the start of my life to where we are today.
So Jeff, the story in the book, which I thought was really nice, is the time when you met Bobby Charlton outside the Castlefield YMCA.
Yes.
Have I got that right?
Yeah.
He gave you an autograph and invited you to the famous Cliff training ground. When did you fall in love with the beautiful game, and what was it like to meet one of England's greatest ever footballers?
Well, I think very, very early. So, if we start off, right at the beginning, I left school at 15 with no qualifications at all other than a degree in truancy, which I speak about in the book. Yeah. I was bullied every day, well, almost every day. It seemed like every day. Bullying, I know now, is completely different. It's more through social media, which I do think has a greater effect on people's lives than physical bullying. So my aim was every time I missed school, not something, I'm talking about on this podcast being proud of. It was just something I did at the time. I used to go and watch Manchester City and Manchester United train. I used to collect autographs then go back into school to sell them to get enough money to go to the next match. And when I went to the next match, I used to collect programs to go back to school to sell the programs, because they used to have little tokens in those days that enabled you. It's a little bit, ironically, it's probably the precluder to AFC Bournemouth's point system. So if you've got 20 points, you're going to get a ticket. If you've got 1, you're going to struggle. It was the same with the tokens. And the more tokens you had, the more you were likely to get a ticket for either Manchester City or Manchester United. I think predominantly Manchester United, in those days. They were certainly higher up the food chain. Yeah. So this particular day, I used to know where the players trained. I probably had a better idea of their schedule than they did. Friday nights, I was always in the hotels in Manchester when I shouldn't have been, collecting autographs from the visiting sides. I knew which hotels they would stay in. They'd always arrive, go out for a walk. Jeff was there, with his scrapbook, pen, and I'd get as many autographs as I could. I'm sure autograph collectors today, I know when people see me and the players at the Vitality, you see same people getting multiple autographs, and they're going to be sold. But that's just life. It's what it is. And then this particular day, I happened to meet the late great Sir Bobby, and I was literally in awe. And for him to turn around to me and ask why I wasn't in school, he was only young, maybe I think 18, 19 himself, just showed what kind of person he was. And I gave him some, BS about it being a teacher's training day. He saw straight through that. Said that, if he ever sees me again out of school, there certainly won't be any autographs. But I went to the Cliff and met, all the great players. And, that was a day that I'll always remember, especially later on, where I've had the honour and privilege of being in the Manchester United boardroom, being hosted by Sir Bobby and Lady Norma. And I've related that story to him. Unfortunately, because of the way he was suffering, I wouldn't have expected him to remember me in any way, whatever. But whenever he came in my boardroom, and whenever I went to Old Trafford to have the honour of being in their boardroom, he would always say, "Jeff, welcome, Rose, welcome." He never forgot my name, even though he would never, recall that. But for me, recalling that moment in front of him was just a great memory.
So, Jeff, now we come to AFC Bournemouth. Phone call from your old friend and former Cherries manager, Kevin Bond, brought your attention to the club. Can you tell us how this came about, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it was totally random. So I didn't even know where Bournemouth was. I'd never heard of Bournemouth. It wasn't on my radar, especially, as a northern boy. I say boy in the nicest possible way, having just reached my 80th birthday. I'll use the words of our, incredible manager, Eddie Howe. Chairman, you are the world's oldest teenager. So that still lives with me every day, and thank you, Eddie, for that. I take it as a compliment. So I think I act like it. Kevin was been my probably oldest friend, in the years that I'd known him. He was captain of Manchester City. His father was manager of Manchester City, and the family moved next door to two of my best friends in Manchester, and that's how I got to meet them. So I used to go to the game with Kevin, and very early on, Kevin Reeves, of course, local boy, Bournemouth player as well. And I used to drive Kevin Reeves to the ground. And you're almost fulfilling your childhood fantasy of wanting to be a footballer, which I was never, unfortunately good enough to be a footballer. It was the only thing I was good at school. It's the only thing I enjoyed at school. So football is absolutely embedded in my life and in my blood. And driving Revo to the ground, with the players' car pass, I used to puff my chest out, have tea and toast with the guys. Now I think, God, if a sports scientist saw a loaf of bread, never mind a cup of tea around a player, or she would go absolutely ballistic. But those were the days, and I was part of the inner sanctum because I knew those guys. Kevin eventually, moved, from club to club, but finished up in Southampton. Coinciding with me moving south in 1984, when I started my business providing advice to the armed forces. So we used to come down to Southampton quite frequently, maybe once a month, and go out for dinner with Kevin and Trina as our dear friends. And he, from Southampton, of course, there was Pompey, with Harry. And I used to go and watch them. I was effectively supporting Kevin rather than a team because he was my friend. Yeah. And then Kevin arrives in Bournemouth as the manager of Bournemouth. I get a random phone call one day. Hi mates, Kev. How do you fancy coming to a game on Saturday? He's now manager, and the great news is the chairman Abdul Jaffer would love to host you for lunch. So I said, oh my God, Kev, that sounds amazing. So I have to put the ground into my sat nav. Not, as I say, never even been up the bypass before. And I arrive at the stadium, greeted by Abdul, and I think we were in the upstairs restaurant. And then Abdul says, Jeff, welcome. Kevin's told me all about your background. Understand you've just sold part of your business. And I didn't realise that I'm being sort of lulled. And, if he'd have had a fishing line, with a sort of 12-foot shark on the end of it, I would have actually taken a bite out of it, because it was the bait. He said, I'm trying to put a consortium together to stave off a winding up notice from HMRC. I can't remember at the time. I've always said it was £1 million, and in round figures 10 people were going to put in 100,000. It might have been at that stage. We didn't, I think, get to the million at that stage, but it was 500,000 at least. And looking for 10 people, including the existing board, and associate directors, which Steve Sly was, of course, and friends and family. I think the friends and family were dwindling pretty quickly. You know where your friends are, don't you, till you ask them to show their wallet. And sort of a dove or, a pigeon will fly out because there's nothing left in it. So I get lulled into this sense of false security. And that was the beginning of my love for the club. I think I mentioned in my book that it was almost like a Victor Kiam moment for those that remember that advert with Remington. I walked through the door, liked it so much I bought it. And that I didn't think at the time was going to happen, but it's what happened to me. And of course it was the day that I met Steve Sly, and Steve and I have remained, the closest of friends ever since. Steve was the one person that stood by me when everybody else had disappeared. Yeah. So that's how I arrived at Dean Court. I still got to say that in front of you two guys, in particular, but, for the avoidance of doubt, now known as the Vitality Stadium, just in case anybody's listening and think, hang on a minute, who's he supporting?
Before being able to purchase the club, you discovered that the golden share was in place, which was owned by the Community Mutual. Still got my certificate for that somewhere. How difficult?
Yeah. Hang on a moment, you're not asking me for a refund now, are you? Yeah. Right, end of interview. Yeah.
How difficult did it make it for not only you, but also to attract potential investors?
Well, this is such a, nobody's ever asked me that before. So thank you for asking me that in all the various podcasts and interviews I've done. It's really interesting. And I, even to this day, I'm not quite certain that I fully understood just what it meant to so many people and what a barrier it was or had previously been to anybody buying the club. And where I differed, and I've been on record as really calling myself an idiot, I bought the club with my heart, not my head. So maybe God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, but for the first or second or third time in my life, I wasn't listening because I was so intent on wanting to buy the club and getting involved with the football club that I didn't realise the significance. But if I tell you that I learned many years afterwards, so many potential buyers walked away from investing in the football club because quite clearly, if you had a modicum of intellect, why would you buy anything and not be in total control? which I now know, some 20 years later, or, next year it will be 20 years since I stepped through the doors of this incredible, wonderful, fabulous football club. And Steve and I almost had to get down. I think I've said somewhere along the line in the book that I had to assume the Toulouse-Lautrec position on my knees in front of the board of the community mutual to beg them to relinquish the shares. And Steve and I, on more than one occasion were being interviewed by, I called it the trust. I think Steve corrected me when he said, I'm not sure it was a trust, it was, although I still think, I call it the trust, everybody knows what it was. But I remember, almost on my knees, begging them to relinquish the golden share, because without that, we couldn't complete the takeover. And we were being interviewed to check whether we were worthy. And I say that, very succinctly, because it doesn't matter what people were calling it. It was to check our integrity. It was almost a precluder to the owners and directors test that is now in place, by the Premier League and the EFL and overseen by the FA. And I now, so I wasn't disagreeing that should be done. You don't want any Tom, Dick and Harry walking through the door saying, I'm buying the club. And it goes from catastrophe to disaster, or whichever is, the greater of the two evils. So eventually, I remember they had a vote, and I can't remember the precise number of votes that came in favour, but it was well over 90%, I understand. There is a figure in the book that Steve verified for me. And we were just elated, because it was only then that we could verify it. But when I was stood in front of them, or kneeling in front of them, metaphorically speaking, I had to convince them that I walked through the door of this football club in October 2006. It was the last home game of that particular month. And I started to fund the club almost from that day to the day that we bought the club. I was paying the best part of £100,000 a month, or whatever the residual amount was needed to top up to make it 100,000, because that was the amount that we needed for wages and overheads. But I didn't even have a share. So if anybody was, you imagine saying to somebody who's questioning your potential integrity, what more could I do? And to top it all, I didn't even support Bournemouth. Yeah. I'd never even know, until Kev made me that call, I didn't even know where it was, let alone where the football club sat in the conurbation. So I'm funding this club. I couldn't have demonstrated any greater level of honesty and integrity. But there was suspicion about why does a boy from Manchester want to actually buy a football club he doesn't support. It's to asset strip. And I've said this on numerous occasions. In front of me, I don't know whether everybody can see, there are 2 cups, a little plant and a book. There are more assets on this table today, talking to you guys, than there was in the football club. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of rumours. There were a lot of people that didn't want to see me and Steve buy the football club because they wanted it themselves. Yeah. Yeah. But now, 20 years later, I don't think there's a person in this entire conurbation that would ever doubt my honesty and integrity and my love for everything and everyone associated with the football club.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Steve Sly, a name I feel often doesn't get the credit that he deserves for the role he played. How important was Steve to you and the club during this period, Jeff?
Well, I can't, I don't think I could put into words just how important he was. And I think, without putting it into words, I think I've just summed it up. The story of how I met Steve is really funny. He hates me telling it, but the more he hates it, it's like a little boy that's forbidden, for eating sweets. I will tell it. Abdul walked down the boxes and Steve had a share in one of the boxes. And it proved to me in life, never judge a book by its cover, well, apart from mine. This is Jeff Mostyn, the chairman, the man that saved AFC Bournemouth. Thank you. Yeah. And he came out in a pair of shorts. He denies he was wearing shorts that day, but I love the story. And a T-shirt. And Abdul said very proudly, "Oh, this is one of our associate directors." Now, as soon as you say that, about a director of a football club, you suddenly have this picture. I'm sort of thinking of Sir Chips Keswick at Arsenal, this landed gentry. Out comes Steve, larger than life, and he was, bless him, he's half the size, that he was. Yeah. He comes out, he's got tattoos all the way down his arms, he's got one on his leg. When he lifted his hand to shake mine, he had to hold it up. He must have had half a Brink's mat, on his arm, and then he was stooping forward because the other half of Brink's mat was round his neck. And then the piece de la resistance was, Abdul said, "Oh, this is Steve Sly, an associate director. He's a second-hand car dealer." And I'm thinking, oh my God, no wonder this club is in the you-know-what. So, and then Steve said the last thing, he said, honestly, Jeff, as he fondly calls me, he said, "Only you could ever have got away with what happened next. Because when we shook hands to say goodbye, you then turn round to almost embarrass me amongst all my guests in the box by saying, 'Great to meet you, Steve. I'm just checking to see if I've got my ring on my finger.'" And he's become my dearest friend and ally. And without him, I don't think, again, this journey would have taken the turn, because he was the local boy. He had the knowledge, and he worked tireless with me to try to find investors to bring into the club, because we knew that the level of debt that was not disclosed was so great that we wouldn't have been able to fund it. Me in particular, because Steve had done his bit. And it's all relative, whether I'm putting in £100,000 and Steve's putting in £1,000. It's relevant to where you are. The meaning and the love is still there, even if it was a £10 note, as many supporters have done over many occasions for the love of their football club in the days of the bucket collections. And I will never forget that, because without that, we would never have actually bought the club. So all these stepping stones, from the Winter Gardens through to when we bought the football club, would not have been possible without the love, the passion of the greatest group of supporters I've ever had the honour of working with.
When yourself and Steve took charge of the club, you had a real, I would describe probably as a bit of a skeleton team running the club. But how important was the likes of Lawrence Jones, Liz Finney, long-term club secretary Keith McAllister, and obviously Neil, who you've just mentioned in a previous question?
They were just incredible. And when you think about it, and I've lavished them with praise, in the book as well, it was fundamental. And when you think they were closing in on the administration period, long before that, it was actually the time leading up to that. They were working for no wages in some months. They always had my word, and my word is my bond. I would never have let them down. It wasn't that we didn't have the money, but the money had to go to keep the club alive. But somehow they willingly trusted me, and they knew they would be paid. But how many people, do you know in any other business, there's something about a football club that it's not a job. Somehow, I'm working for AFC Bournemouth. Oh, this is great. You put your supporter hat on. Yeah. And I was the chairman, but a supporter. It's only a title. We're all the same. So without them, once again, the journey would have had a different ending. And forever grateful, to them, as I've said in my book, all these people that I was surrounded by. We've got more sports scientists now. We've got more analysts. We've got more recruitment. We've got, more masseuses, we've got more technicians than we had supporters when I bought the club, let alone staff. Yeah. And, Steve and I, we were almost delivering mail, because we couldn't afford a first-class stamp. That's how bad it was. But these are people that, all these years later have had a mention, and they didn't need a mention in my book. Every day I told everybody at the football club how special they were. I was asked that by a little girl in school when I was in the schools with Steve Cuss. the community. What does a chairman do? Nobody's ever asked me that. And I had to buy a bit of time, and I said, I can only liken it to your headmaster. And your headmaster's role is to make sure that all the teachers are providing the support for you. And that's what I do with my executive team, the management team, is making sure that, and the staff are providing everything that will ensure success for the football club. But it was an absolute great question. And I said, I'm pleased that my board of directors never asked me what a chairman does, because I don't think I ever told them. But what I did do that no other chairman I know does, every single day I made every single person feel special and valued.
So Jeff, the debts of 6 million had mounted up, and I feel any other person would have run, let's be honest, and not looked back. What made you and Steve Sly face this head on and not turn away?
I've never been a quitter. I've always had the confidence in my own ability to turn things round. And in this case, it wasn't the ability that I felt I had to finance it. It was the ability that I felt I had to find somebody that I could bring in, either in its entirety to take over the football club by buying time and keeping it afloat by funding what I had to do to get there, or to bring in a partner that could help with the journey forward. And I'm pleased that, I had that resolve. Probably, was it the worst decision I ever made in my life, buying the football club? I said recently, yes. Because it had a happy ending doesn't make that decision right. Yeah. It's like being run over. And was that the worst decision you ever made, crossing the road, when that car was accelerating instead of braking? The answer is yes. You were alive to actually tell the story. Are you going to do it again? No, because it had a happy ending. You'll have learnt from it. So I was asked recently at the Langham Hotel when I was speaking with Peter Schmeichel and Michel Roux by a lady who they'd asked them about 1,000 questions, and suddenly, oh, this one's for Jeff. I thought, God, I forgot I was there for a minute. And then she said, was this the best decision you ever made? It must be. And I said, no. If you compartmentalise that, it was the worst. It was a literally, I don't like saying a car crash, which I know I've said previously, because that's disrespectful when they're happening every day. It was a financial ruin, financial mess. Because it's had a happy ending doesn't make it right. It's turned out to be the greatest decision I ever made, and I'm thrilled predominantly for all the people that are now enjoying this incredible roller coaster of a ride with the club where it is today, which wouldn't have been possible had I thought that decision through more than the seconds that I did.
Yeah. If we can just touch on the administration time. Ex-Leeds chairman and administrator Gerald Krasner comes in. You continue to finance the club, but you promised your wife Rosie that you wouldn't put any more money in. And then, of course, there was the famous nod at the press conference. What can you share about your emotions from that press conference on that day?
It was unbelievable, and it's only now I can even talk about it. I think, in other interviews I've had, I sort of break down at this stage because it's raw, it comes back, and anything that involves my wife is hugely emotional for me. And, we went away, we went to Spain for 3 days because we had the two guys from the West Country, I can't even remember their names now, who had potentially bought the football club. You will recall they had, again, the scarves in the stand. Yeah. Gerald was thrilled. Yeah. I was obviously, elated that I found that it wasn't elated that I was, leaving the football club, but I was elated that I'd actually achieved what I've just discussed to you. I wanted a future for this football club. Otherwise, why have I done everything that I've done, throwing money, into a dark hole effectively? So Rosie and I go to Spain. We'd only been there a day. And I'll never forget, we must have been sort of close to, some church, and I think it was about 1 o'clock, so thank God it wasn't 12 o'clock. But, there was only one chime. We're just having a glass of wine. Phone goes, it's Gerald. Hey, lad, get your arse back here. The deal's fallen through. And I just said, what do you mean it's fallen through? He said, there's no money. He said, like so many other people, Jeff, there's only one person that's ever written a cheque, and that's you. People have promised, 1,000 people want to buy this football club. Most of them can't even afford a programme. And those were his words, not mine. So suddenly, having thought enough was enough, we decide on the plane going home that I can't continue, because what people have to understand, it wasn't going to be just a cheque. I was taking on the responsibility of, first of all, giving a cheque for a stay of execution, then continuing to have to fund the club, which Gerald had made quite clear to me. So we said, enough is enough. I'm literally giving up the financial security that I'd worked 25 years for in my own business for, my wife and my children. So we said, no more. So off I go on the infamous Friday, I think it was. And it's quite interesting. I've met, two people, since. Mark McAdam was present, and, Mark's been a really, dear friend to me, and Mark has written in my book as well. And also Belvers. So I did an interview for the television documentary that we've just had, and when I broke down again at this very point, so I'm being really good today, but come on, Jeff, be strong. And it is difficult as I'm trying to sort of think of other things and get through this little part of the interview. And Belvers said to me, I was in the room that day, Jeff. I forgot all about that he was there. And it was the most emotional time. Krasner took us aside, beforehand. He said, right, this is what's happening. You're going to stand at the back of the room. I'm going to ask you for the cheque for £100,000. He said, and in fairness to Gerald, he said, I don't know why you would want to give it to me, knowing the debt and knowing how difficult it had been finding a new investor. But he said, this is what you're going to do. I'm going to ask you for this. You're going to nod if you're going to give me the cheque. You're going to shake your head. If not, if you nod your head, we're going on. If you shake your head, I will liquidate the club live on air today. And in his own words, the club wouldn't have made the weekend. So he gets to the interview, time. He asked a question. I don't even hear it. My mind is all over the place. And I suppose subconsciously, almost subliminally, I heard it. And he said, Jeff, I need to ask you again. And he asked me the question a second time. And I'm thinking, how can I let this club die? 100 years of history. It was hard.
Yeah, no. Everyone's thankful for you doing it, Jeff. I mean, what you've done was, unbelievable. Thanks to you, we still have the football club today.
God, nearly got through that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
So Gerald Krasner at the time looked like Mr. Bad Guy, but what was he really like during that administration, and also as a person?
Well, he very kindly came to the launch event that we had at Vitality, which really meant something to me, as well as agreeing to put his name on the front cover of the book, because the front cover of this book is really interesting. That originally it was, Jeff Mostyn, the man that saved AFC Bournemouth, which in a roundabout way is still on there. And I sat down in front of Neville Cooperbits, who's co-written the foreword alongside Eddie Howe for the book, because Vitality had very kindly sponsored the book. And he said, how are we doing with the cover? And I said, it's amazing, Neville, we've nearly finished this now. So I hand him the cover, and he said, hang on a moment, this has changed. So I said, why has it changed? And really eagle-eyed, he noticed that it had Jeff Mostyn, the man that helped save AFC Bournemouth. And I like to think that I'm the most humble person, or one of them, that you'll ever wish to meet. And that's because of my mum and dad, bless them. When people don't ever realise, when I'm out, you carry this great aura as a Premier League chairman. There's only 20 in the world at any one time. And I was one of them, for 17 years almost. And I think it's because of the way I act. You know, I'm like Mr. Cuddly, Mr. Tactile. There's not another Premier League chairman that acts like me. Just a normal, everyday person. One of the boys, one of the supporters. And that's something I'm really proud of, that aura, you know, that I give. That I talk, you know, why would I be embarrassed talking to somebody who's less fortunate than me? I can talk to kings and queens, and I can talk to people that are less fortunate than me because I like to help them. So I didn't think that I had saved the football club. Yeah. It was just too much of a statement. Like, who do you think you are? I felt so many people had contributed. So Neville, bless him, turned round and he said, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Did you buy the football club in 2007 when it was going out of business? I said yes. He said, thank you. Did you nod to Gerald Krasner when the club was being liquidated live on air at a press conference? I said, yes, I did. He said, you saved the football club, get rid of that word. Yeah. He knew, he could read my mind that whilst I agreed, I wasn't happy. He said, have you spoken to Gerald Krasner since that day? I said, no. He said, why don't you phone him and ask whether you can use his quote on the front cover, because I know that will satisfy you, because then you are not saying you saved the club, Gerald Krasner is. And that's how the wording on the front cover of this book manifested itself. And I feel so at ease in my own skin, not saying that myself.
So just a bit of a personal question for you, Jeff. So at the time we were deducted 10 points as the club went into administration by the Football League. And Kevin and the boys, they went on a pretty decent run after the 10-point deduction. Looked with a glimmer of hope of staying up. 6 straight wins. But the final game of the season at Carlisle, the boys travelled all the way up there. And you had a bit of a double head-on moment, I suppose, where you had not only the game to worry about, but it was also your daughter's wedding that day. So how did you balance the emotions that day of being not only the father of the bride, but also the team, being the chairman of the club and hoping that, you know, the team stay up and avoid relegation to League Two?
Oh my God, it was definitely, I can say categorically, it wasn't a day that any father of the bride would want to have at any stage of their lives, because the emotion of, you know, being a father of the bride to start off with is one thing. Being a chairman of a football club where, you know, I've got, you know, 10,000 brides and grooms having a responsibility for is another level. But Radio Solent that week, I don't know if you remember, had a phone in, and it will the chairman go to Carlisle or will he go to his daughter's wedding? They delivered me on the Friday night a single frequency earpiece to my home, so I could actually take commentary of the game. So I've got this in my ear, and I'm walking Janine, you know, almost, if you like, metaphorically speaking, down the aisle, when the result came in and we drew 1-1. And of course the bottom club, Cheltenham, beat, I think, the top club, was it Doncaster?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, God almighty. Where I've dragged that from in my 80 years. I'm impressed with myself today. Yeah, come on everybody, round of applause just for the memory there. And the result came through, and of course that was against all odds that they would win, and as a consequence of that we were literally relegated. Yeah. And you know, everybody knows my emotions, so I literally burst out crying, and everybody at the wedding thought I was crying because I was giving my daughter away. I say I've been trying to give her away for 5 years, and you know, let alone on the day. So it was because we were relegated. But part of my guest list that day was John Bond and his wife Jan facing a calamitous relegation. Yeah. So it was, you know, beyond any level of emotion you could ever wish for. Yeah. But, you know, like everything else in life, you know, we moved on, and, you know, I moved on very quickly that afternoon, because it would have been unfair to Janine if I was, you know, little Jack Horner for the rest of the day feeling sorry for myself. I couldn't turn the clock back, and what I had to do was celebrate her day with her.
We must give a shout out to your rock, your beloved wife Rosie, as her support throughout this time, which continued through to the good times at the club. How important has Rosie and your family been behind the scenes for you, Jeff?
We are the closest family you could ever, wish to meet. My wife, Rosie, the love of my life, we've been married 44 years. She's been by my side, through thick and thin, the journey up, the journey down, the journey back up again, sideways, backwards, front ways, like most families, life hasn't, been perfect, but our relationship has. And, throughout the years at the football club, she was, front and centre of everything that I did, including hosting the boardroom with me. No, I don't again know any other, chairman and partner, wife, that host their own boardroom, but we did. And what I love most of all, there's 30 perspective writers, or in round figures, 30 people that have written in my book. And I love the fact that nearly every single one of them has mentioned Rosie, who I call her Rosie affectionately. She's just been absolutely amazing. And last night we had, another book launch at Bournemouth University, hosted by Bournemouth University, and my gratitude to Bournemouth University, for allowing us the facilities. And Jordan Clark, who hosted the night, asked Rosie to stand up and speak. And that's not easy in front of 220 people. And she grabbed the microphone and, she was asked how we met, and spoke with a great sense of humour. So that my humour must have rubbed off on her. And she and my children have been absolutely incredible. And they've been immense in this last 18 months since I stepped down, because that's when I needed the family most of all, in what I described earlier as like a divorce from me and the football club. Even though it's not a divorce, because I'm still an ambassador for the Community Sports Trust with Steve Cuss. So I'm still very much, part of what's going on, but not in the main club. So nothing stands greater or taller than my wife. And that's not metaphorically speaking, because she is 5'10".
Let's talk about the season. Obviously, after relegation, we had the 17-point reduction at the start of that season. The administrator had sold off Sam Vokes to Wolves for £300,000, which gave a bit of cash in during the summer. But then Sport 6 come along, and Paul Baker, and I can only remember his nickname was Savvy.
Saviamutu. Alistair Saviamutu.
Yes. Can you explain the takeover and what happened during that time with Sport 6?
Yeah, Peak 6. No, not Peak 6. That was the Americans. Yeah. So Sport 6, should I say. Yeah. So we met them in Manchester Airport. I mean, it's really interesting. A Radisson Blu Hotel. And it was the first time that I'd met Paul Baker at the time. And David Hinchcliffe, who was the lawyer attached to Gerald Krasner, and Walker Morris, who were the lawyers. And David's become a really dear friend of mine, and he's written in the book as well. So, all these people are almost poacher turned gamekeepers in my life, sliding door moments, as I call them. And Paul was the first person that actually physically gave us a cheque to show willing, and at least that one didn't bounce. So they took over the football club, and I think that was circa 2008-9 season anyway. And of course, those that remember it fondly, it was the start of the financial collapse. Paul Baker, I always felt, was a very honourable person, and he owned UK Same Day, which was, I think, second or third of the largest logistic carriers in the UK. Xavi and Woolworths were two of his biggest clients. Both by coincidence happened to collapse along with HMV, and along with that his business collapsed, and then that sent them into a financial spin. Having suffered the financial crash, then it became apparent that they were going to struggle with the financial implications of the commitment they'd made to buy the shares of the football club. There was sort of another sliding door moment, and this is only my humble opinion, but we played Blythe Spartans, if you remember, in the FA Cup, and the prize for beating them was a payday of round about £250,000 playing Blackburn Rovers in the next round. And I truly believe, and this is only my humble opinion, so it's no slight or criticism of Paul or Savvy, but I think that that was crucial to their longevity at the football club to keep it going, given the financial situation that they allegedly found themselves in. We lost the game, as you'll recall, very late on. And as a consequence of that, I think the writing was on the wall as to how long they were going to remain in tenure. The rest is history. We had to get the shares back almost by default because I had to write off yet again an awful lot of money that was due to me. But, hey ho, in for a penny, in for another, big chunk. Yeah. The main thing was we were back in situ again, trying to find somebody else who could take the football club on. And that was when I, of course, Adam Murray, who, is very dear to my heart as well. He, along with Steve and myself, started a consortium, the three of us, and we brought in Eddie Mitchell and Brenda as our partners.
So Jeff, there was the time that we parted ways with Kevin Bond early on in the season. Jimmy Quinn come in, and his period at the club wasn't very successful, and the decision was made to relieve him of his duties and bring in a 31-year-old coach in the name of Eddie Howe. What kind of attributes and what reasons did you and Adam Murray decide to give Eddie the job at the time? Because it was a massive task, still 7 points adrift from safety at the time. So what made you and Adam decide that he was the right man?
Well, I think you're asking me, today not only to do an interview, but to be a clairvoyant. So if you put your hand out, I might read your future, because we've only met today, so I don't know what your attributes are. I think that's a pretty good way of starting the conversation or answering that question. What we knew Eddie had was the love beyond words of the football club. We knew that he was almost the apprentice, because working under Kevin and Rob Newman, in his role working with the kids almost at the football club, he had that ability, and you could recognise that there were leadership qualities in the way he went about his daily business. As a player, and I never had the fortune of watching him play, but what supporters tell me, they could see leadership qualities in how he went about his daily work on the training field and on match days. So we knew he had potential. Nobody, as I say, apart from my jocularity and the clairvoyancy, would have any idea of just how good or how bad he may have been. We had a decision to make. We needed an experienced manager. Eddie was not that person, but we could not afford an experienced manager. And let's be honest, could you name in front of me today a manager who would take on a almost guaranteed relegation club, minus 17 points, in Division 2, and risk his career? You could, if we were a club with huge financial backing. In other words, we know Big Sam, would come in at a moment's notice. But, these guys are being paid maybe 2, 3, 4 million to save a Premier League football club. These guys would not be in a second division side, minus 17 points, thinking, Jeff, I'll come in and do a really good job for you. I know Big Sam has put his head above the parapet recently with Wolves. Yeah. Almost. He said, I don't really need a job, but if they ask me, I'd be keen to do it. And, I'm sure Big Sam it would be a name that would come to any club chairman, because he's managed to do that a number of times. Not in Division 2, not minus 17 points. And the other thing, Sam, thank you so much for sitting with me today. You know, it's a joy being in your company. Thank you for taking on the role of trying to save AFC Bournemouth. We can't pay you anything. Would that still be okay, Sam? Sam, come back. So that's the point. We couldn't have an experienced manager. So, you know, and again, this was, you know, Adam, who, you know, the credit needs to go to him. Eddie is the man. We know that he'll have the dressing room. We know he'll have the supporters. And we know if anybody can save this club, it's the man that if you slice him in half, he is a stick of Bournemouth rock. Yeah. And that's how he got the job. And oh my God, if I could have predicted what followed, I probably wouldn't be sat in front of you now. I'd be in some Caribbean island with a 6-foot Cuban cigar and a glass of champagne saying, you know, if you have any problems about the future, just talk to Jeff.
Yeah. We'll touch on the Grimsby game very shortly, or actually within this question, to be fair. Eddie made the decision to bring back the big man, Steve Fletcher, obviously massive club legend, big personality. But what impact did Steve have at that time, bringing him back in? And what were your memories and emotions from that Grimsby game?
Well, I mean, Fletch, I could copy and paste the decision of Eddie. You know, was Fletch the right person? You know, if you were again looking for, you know, this incredible talent that you think, right, as a footballer could come and save the football club, would Fletch have been number one, you know, on the list? He's a Bournemouth legend. So was Eddie. Yeah. So somehow he was the person, the right person that fitted Eddie's bill. Again, the economics came into it. If you look for another striker, they're going to want a lot more money. Fletch is Bournemouth through and through. So you slice both of them in half and you've got another stick of Bournemouth rock. He would come and play, leave his shirt. Well, you know, he'd prefer to play without a shirt. You know, he had it off so many times. God, you know, a legend in his own lifetime. But he, you know, almost again, metaphorically speaking, saved the football club with that goal. Because if we'd have been relegated, I think in another interview, people said to me, didn't you say to Eddie, the club is finished? Because we'd have been seven leagues down, you know, the National League structure, and we couldn't have afforded it. There'd have been no income. It would have almost been, again, another bucket list, you know, and I'm not talking about a bucket list, I want to go to, you know, the Caribbean. It was a bucket collection list. So it was monumental. It was another sliding door moment. And, you know, Eddie knew Fletch, who's going to play for who. We knew that Eddie would have the dressing room, he would have the players, they would die, you know, for Eddie. And the big un, you know, as it's affectionately known, you know, would be the man that would eventually, literally, not metaphorically speaking, leave his shirt on the pitch.
Eddie Mitchell then bought shares, Jeff, with his wife Brenda, and become chairman. You became vice chairman. How important was Eddie's time at the club, and how did that partnership work?
So Eddie, we were 50-50 partners when he came in. He made a statement to me. I need an option on 1% of your shares. Otherwise, I'm not, metaphorically speaking, getting into bed with you. And that's how that partnership started. So I was always on the back foot, knowing at any time he could exercise that option and he would have total control of the club. Did it bother me at the time? I suppose I didn't like that statement being made when it was made. It's almost sort of a threat. But did I have a choice? No. And that's why he made the statement. It was Hobson's choice. We needed to save the football club. I wasn't prepared to take it on single-handedly. 50% of something was worth 100% of nothing, or more than 100% of nothing. So I agreed to that, and that's how that partnership started. I've said previously, people have asked me, did you agree on everything? The answer was no. And that wouldn't come as a surprise to, anybody that, knew Eddie. And I've got to speak not with any emotional here, I've just got to wear my business hat. But the impact that he had, was to help save the club when we needed him most. And the biggest impact that he had, as far as I was personally concerned, was introducing me to Maxim Deming. So if I was asked what was the biggest thing that Eddie Mitchell did for this football club, it was introduce Maxim Deming to the club, because we know what happened, after that. And I've spoken passionately about my respect for Eddie, my condolences, to Brenda, to Joe and to the boys, because no matter what this, and I use the word that supporters have often used to me, this Marmite character, had on the football club, you have to strip all that away and say he was a human being. And that's why I'm so respectful towards him, speaking to you today, and I've paid my respects in the book.
So the celebratory friendly was arranged with Real Madrid. What does it take to arrange a game like that, and especially at the time for the football club? Obviously, we've just been promoted to the Championship. What work and effort went into making sure that game could go ahead?
Well, it would have been more detailed than anything that we'd ever experienced before. And I think it was an opportunist meeting that, and again, allegedly, because I wasn't, even today, sure of, funny enough, until I was asked that question last night, I'd forgotten we'd even played Real Madrid, because it's something so historical. And what I did say that I'd like to say to all the supporters today, the next time we play Real Madrid, we won't be paying them to come. It'll be part of our Champions League campaign. So respect, and let's do this. I can't believe, I say the Champions League because I'm not sure Real Madrid will ever be playing in the Conference League, or the Europa League, but who knows. But I think we will play them again one day, and it won't be a friendly. So it was Tom that actually met somebody, and again, allegedly in a pub, where they were playing one of the Israeli teams in a pre-season friendly. And because of security issues, I think it was an Israeli team. It might have, also been one of the Turkish sides, but let's just say there were political reasons and security reasons why that game was cancelled. And very short notice, we had to arrange a friendly. I think the cost was about £100,000 bringing them over for the friendly. And of course, Eddie, this was going to happen come what may. He might have had to build another 3 houses, but he was determined to get the Galacticos here. And I mean, if you know Eddie, and most people know him far better than me, this was right up his boulevard. The cosmetic side of life, almost the Sandbanks, Galacticos coming. They would have suited all of Eddie's houses, bless him. And here we are, we're rubbing shoulders with, Carlo Ancelotti, with Zinedine Zidane, with Ronaldo, with all the great Galacticos. And it was just absolutely unreal. Me sitting next to Perez, at lunch, the great legendary president, having pictures taken with Ronaldo, and even Zinedine Zidane, Carlo Ancelotti. And my book is actually based in part on Carlo Ancelotti's autobiography, because in that he had the perspective writers, and that's what encouraged me to have people writing about me rather than me talking about myself. And that was my book manager, Ed Bowers, who Carlo Ancelotti is one of his favourite characters, and his book is one of his favourite books. So that's how there was synergy there. But it was amazing. And a supporter said to me, I heard a rumour that Ronaldo saw you in the Haven Hotel. This was when we were all having lunch, and said, hey Jeff, can I have a photo? And you turned around to him and said, do I know you? And that is, I can absolutely assure you, not right. It was the other way round. So it was great memories, and for everybody that was at the game that day, it was just sensational. Yeah. In the history of the club, to have played, and it put us on the map.
As owner of the whole football club, after his purchase of Mitchell shares, Jeff, Maxim phones you. in 2013 from Moscow with, as you described in the book, with excitement and urgency. Can you tell us about this call and the emotions you felt when he told you the reason for that call?
I was literally just put the phone down and I was in buckets of tears. The club means so much to me. I don't think people really will ever know. My passion is beyond measurable for this football club. The love I have for it, and in particular, my beloved supporters. And that will never change. There will always be my family, always. And I can't change. And to get the phone call from Maxim, it was really funny. Jeff, it's Maxim here, we're having a board meeting. I'm with Eddie Howe, I'm with Jason Tyndall, I'm with Neil Blake. And I'll never forget, I said to him, well, hang on a moment, Maxim. I'm in Bournemouth, how can it be have a board meeting? I'm the vice chairman. He said, you are listening, I am talking. That was verbatim. And when Maxim spoke, you listened. And he said, I learned 2 new words from Eddie Howe today, shoe-in. Congratulations, you're the chairman of the football club once again. And I remain that to the day that Maxim left. And the love that I have for him, the love I have for his parents, who were almost my surrogate parents, is immeasurable. And the confidence that he had in me to run the club alongside Neil Blake as chief executive on his behalf through many, many opportunities that people showed, people that wanted to buy the club, always seemed to have the impression that they would retain my services. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Having taken the club from -17 to the Premier League. And obviously Bill had different ideas, which is his prerogative. And I totally and utterly respect that. He's chairman and president of every business that he owns. So, always grateful to Maxim. We're in, contact. Phoned me on my 80th birthday to wish me happy birthday, and my love for him and his family will be forever.
Wow, it's lovely. It's lovely you're still in contact. So what was Maxim's long-term plan and vision? Because obviously Maxim took over, we had 2 seasons in the Championship, and then bang, we were in the Premier League. Was it a case of like, right, we're going for it, we're going to go for Premier League? Or was it more of a consolidation plan? If that's the right word, consolidation. Yeah. Was it that kind of plan, or what was his plan and vision?
It was a measured view. Yeah. So there was no way that a club of our size competing against the clubs that we were competing against economically, you could say to anybody, right, we're going to have a season in the Championship, then we're going to be promoted to the Premier League. You've only got to look at Leeds United and Notts Forest, just to name but 2, almost 20 years languishing in the Championship. And you could name another 10 clubs. I've often been referred to as saying, and I know I've said it, there are 30 clubs in the Premier League. There's only 20 at any one time. Yeah. And I think that's a pretty good balanced statement, because with the yo-yo you've got clubs going up and down. Norwich were a classic and didn't make it back. You've got 6 clubs that have been up and down in the last 2 seasons alone. And we know that there's likelihood of 1 of the 3, if not 2 of the 3, Sunderland have made a remarkable start to this season, are going to go back down. So you couldn't even hope to get there. It's the hardest league in Europe, in my humble opinion, to get out of. So to finish 10th in our first season and then go straight through the roof the next was beyond any of our wildest imaginations. I, for one, even as chairman of the football club, thought at some stage we're going to implode. We just kept winning. Yeah. It was ridiculous. And we got out. And to stay in the Premier League for 5 seasons was almost better than getting there in the first place. A greater achievement. Yeah. Quite remarkable. We were favourites, odds on, every single one of those 5 seasons to be relegated, and we defied the odds. And that's what we do. It was our siege mentality that we developed in the 2nd division from -17 that still remained in that dressing room.
we've got to ask about one of the most memorable moments for AFC Bournemouth fans. The night we played Bolton, promotion was almost certain. The fairy tale from League Two to the Premier League, Jeff, was no longer a dream. We have to ask you about that famous moment, Jeff. How did the cameras with Sky catch you in the changing room celebrating with the boys?
It was remarkable, and that was played last night at Bournemouth University, much to my delight, 220 guests, having my arse spanked by Callum Wilson. I did actually say last night that there's a lot of people in the room last night that were jealous. And what was the most embarrassing night of my life has turned into almost my signature, that wherever I'm doing interviews, we'd like to welcome on stage Jeff Mostyn, and bang, the video goes up there. And I've now got used to it and, accept it. I was in the box, celebrating with Maxim, Neil, and the directors and anybody that was in the box that night. And I think we had more shots, on target than the players actually had, on the pitch that night. It was like one after the other, Maxim and all his entourage. And I suddenly realised, Christ, I haven't seen the boys. So I literally almost throw myself 3 floors down to the dressing room. Unbeknown to me, Sky had gone in there, seconds before and said, right, lads, something to the effect is, you can do anything. You can take your clothes off, swing from the ceiling. You cannot, under any circumstances, use any expletives. Yeah. The mad professor leaps down and the doors burst open, and all I could see was the celebration. And I just lost the plot. I mean, I was bouncing. I forgot last night. I was bouncing like a trampoline. And suddenly the boys have grabbed me and I'm screaming, I love you effing boys. And that caused even more, literally the boys were just wetting themselves laughing. And, Callum then gets in the act. It was just a moment of sheer joy. How many other chairmen would you ever see in that situation? I'd say none. It showed the love in the room for me and my love for the boys. That was how close our relationship was. So it's a moment I'll never forget, and it's a moment I treasure, and I'm no longer embarrassed. I'm almost proud that I shared that magic moment, with them. And I've apologised 1,000 times for just using one expletive that I very seldom do, but I defy anybody who was, partly under, the influence of 10 shots on target prior to me getting there, not to express the first thing that came to their mind.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been forgiven by Sky, I'm sure. So stepping up to the Premier League is a massive task. Obviously, successful to be there in our first period for 5 years. What kind of planning and how busy were you during that summer as a board of directors? Obviously, we know recruitment and Eddie would have been busy with stuff on the field, but how busy were you guys in the boardroom, and what actually did it entail for the whole summer?
24/7. From the minute we were promoted, we had the list from the Premier League of the improvements that we had to make almost to comply. The thing that you've just mentioned, broadcasting is the be all and end all to the Premier League. It's what funds it effectively, and the improvements we had to make to the lighting, the level of lux to cope with maybe 30 plus cameras compared to life in the EFL with limited numbers, and we'd only spent a fortune when we got promoted to the Championship to improve the lux level of the floodlights from where we were in Division 1, which sort of annoyed us beyond any measurable doubt. And we had a Premier League induction meeting with Richard Scudamore, and Richard's also become a very dear friend of mine. He's also written in the book and was also at the launch of the book in London along with Debbie Hewitt, who's chair of the FA, and that just, I think, shows the respect that I have somehow earned as a humble human being from those people in the hierarchy of football. So Richard says, this is what you need to do. We needed to create a new press area for overseas press. We had to have floor wiring for Sky and all the overseas broadcasters. So it was like just plugging a USB, into a cable rather than, warning signs all over the car park, be careful of the cables, or on match day, 5 of our stewards holding a cable because we didn't have any money, to support a camcorder that was recording our matches, or an iPhone. And that all had to be laid. We had to have a separate entrance for the players before they all went through the main door. We had to have, I think it was 6 or 8 television interview rooms, which was previously our sort of indoor warm-up area. We had to have a separate medical facility for match day doctors. We had to have a new press centre, media room. So in other words, the interior of the main stand was going to be completely wiped out, which meant we needed to have a pavilion where the players could now go, because the only thing that remained was the dressing room and Eddie's room, at the front of the tunnel. And then right at the end of this list was undersoil heating. And I remember, Richard Scudamore, who came down because we were a newly promoted club, he said, are there any questions here? And I put my hand up. He said, Jeff, you have a question. What is that? And I said, oh my God, Richard, I mean, this wish list is ridiculous. So I said, if you don't mind me saying, and I didn't have the relationship I've got with him now, so I was probably putting my head above the parapet. I said, you can forget about the undersoil heating. Do you know where you are? You're actually in Bournemouth. We've got a microclimate here. We don't need undersoil heating. And he said, thank you, Jeff. Are there any more questions? So that was the end of that. I was absolutely smacked, almost, a Callum spanking here, and I was put in my box. We needed it. I think it's about 35 million a game, and there was no way the Premier League are going to have a game called off, even in a microclimate. So it was non-stop 24/7, and it was incredible how we got the pavilion built, and all credit to the team that were responsible for that.
Well, after relegation, Jeff, when Eddie left the club after COVID and everything else, how hard was it knowing that one of the best coaches in English football was leaving the club? JT took the reins. Why do you not feel that it worked out for Jason?
I can't really answer that, question, because I think you need to ask probably JT that question. What was what are the mechanics of that? It was always, I said last night that JT and Eddie are like a marriage. It's for better or worse. And he's not just an assistant manager and assistant coach. He's a confidant, to Eddie, and vice versa. So, suddenly you've got Morecambe and Wise, and, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, Morecambe's not here.
Yeah.
It's broken, almost straight away, and what an act to have to follow. But Maxim was insistent on he deserved a chance to step up, and it wasn't, I don't think, an indictment on JT that this didn't work out. In another environment, it may well have worked out, and it may well work out in the future if JT ever wants to take that step again. And he stepped in for Eddie during Eddie's recent illness, to great effect. I just think it was very, very difficult, for the two of them to work separately, just as it was difficult, for us at the football club working without Eddie.
Yeah.
So, I know how I felt about it, and, Eddie and Jason very kindly sent a message because they couldn't be at the launch last night, to say how disappointed they were that they couldn't be with me on my night. And that shows the strength of the relationship all these years, 4 years later. And next week, they very kindly offered to come to Waterstones with me with a book launch, because Eddie's written the foreword for my book and he's fundamental to the story. They've given up their time to come into Waterstones, in a place in Newcastle where they could bring the city to a standstill because they're treated like gods.
So last couple of questions now, Jeff, and thanks for answering all these for us. You stepped down, from your role as chairman at AFC Bournemouth. Can you give us an insight into your final day as chairman at AFC Bournemouth and the emotions you felt knowing that you were stepping down from the position as chairman?
Well, it was, without any doubt, the most emotional day that I'd spent there, I think, since the Gerald Krasner nod, which, also, had me in tears, especially on the way back, having to say to my wife, hi, sweetheart, forget the holiday, forget the car, forget the shopping. I've just spent another £100,000 on the club. This time it wasn't money. It was almost like a broken heart. And I'll never forget, I spent time downstairs with the boys in the dressing room, after the game. I know Bill, because, we were working side by side, if you like, that I was almost a minister without portfolio because Bill was the owner, I was the chairman. But that day it was announced that the Premier League had approved, he'd qualified through the owners and directors test, and he became the chairman of the football club. So I suppose for a few hours there was like two chairmen on board the ship, even though there was only one operational. I was looking after the boardroom. I think it's the kindest way of, trying to describe the circumstances. And I remember coming out of the dressing room and I was like, it's so emotional. Chris Grealish, who's now the operations director, he was like head of security really at the time, because he took over Liz Finney's role. He was there embracing me, and I was in floods of tears for 10-15 minutes, all to the extent that my wife had sent somebody down from the boardroom to find out where I was. She was worried about me because I'd been downstairs for maybe 45 minutes, and there I was, just an absolute emotional wreck. And that's just how much that meant to me. And I knew that was almost my last day when I was going to carry out my duties, responsibilities, and my love of being with the boys after a game, being with the manager after a game, doing what I do best, making people that in my life feel special. It was a very, very hard day for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Really imagine that. It's been very difficult after so long at the club.
Your role today, Jeff, at the club is the Community Sports Trust Ambassador. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so I assist Steve Cuss and the community sports team in the community. Really, there's a clue in the title. So Steve works very closely with the schools, with care homes, hospices, previously with the girls' teams, which he's now relinquished that responsibility. But he works so closely with people that of all ages, ranks, and all circumstances. Homeless people, especially at this time of the year approaching Christmas, we've often gone into centres to provide food and respite for those that are unfortunately less fortunate than us, excuse the grammar there, but maybe sleeping rough in the town centre. And I'm also independently, I have 3 charities. I'm patron of Dorset Cancer Care, I'm patron of Lewis Manning Hospice Trust, and I'm also an ambassador for Julia's House. So it fits very nicely, if you like, into my portfolio of support in the community. I'm also still involved with the FA on the Disability Committee, which is something that's really, dear to my heart as well. My sister had polio from the age of 13. She was paralysed from the waist down. And I suppose subliminally, people have said to me, that's why you do what you do, and it's why you're the human being that you are, because you've seen this and experienced this firsthand. In addition to my compassion for people in their youth who are suffering adversity through my early years of being bullied at school. I understand what adversity is all about, and I want to try to give back as a good person. And I never thought in my life I would ever be a centre of influence. And because of my role as chairman of a Premier League football club, I was almost thrust into that. But having a title means nothing. You have to do something with it. And that's why I do what I do in the town. And just like the work I try to do at Bournemouth University, having had the honour and privilege of being awarded an honorary doctorate in 2017, when you think I'm somebody that left school at 15 with no qualifications, it was one of the best days of my life. And I do as much as I can with the students. A couple of days ago, I was in Bournemouth University with their television production students doing a live interview. We had a rehearsal first, then we did the production, then we went into the editing suite, and then the post everything debate about how they thought, the review of how, and that's what I just love being with the students. When I'm up in Newcastle next week doing the book signing on the Tuesday, I'm performing a guest lecture at Durham University on the Monday, and on the Tuesday, I think it's Teesside or Tameside University, I'm doing another guest lecture. I have a role as an international ambassador for Football for Peace that sits between the United Nations and FIFA, trying to provide peace, tranquility, harmony, respite to areas of deprivation. So, somebody said, you're 80 years of age now, Jeff. Are you thinking of retiring? It doesn't form part of my vocabulary. I just think, I take Eddie's words again, Chairman, you are the world's oldest teenager. You are nothing like your age. And as long as I've got that excitement and that ability mentally to keep giving, to keep supporting the football club the way I do, and it's something I'll always want to do.
So Jeff, obviously the book's out, everyone's buying it. I've read it cover to cover, fantastic read. What other promotions and other things for the book that you're doing over the next sort of several weeks?
Okay, so I've got, apart from the event at Vitality, which is a Vitality invite next Thursday, I've got this book signing in Newcastle. I don't expect all our supporters to get on a plane. If there's anybody that wants a book signing that they've got, just reach out to me and we can meet in the hotel. Like I'm in the Hilton Hotel now in Bournemouth. Very happy to sign books for people. It's my honour. It's amazing how people come. Would you be kind enough to sign my book? Oh my God, I'm the one that should be saying to you, thank you for buying my book and being part of my life, because that's what it is. It's not just a book. It is my life. And it's who I am and what I like to think I've achieved and what I've done. But I'm absolutely thrilled that the book is in the club shop, and the club have invited me on the 22nd, which is the West Ham game, to spend a few hours in the club shop signing books for anybody. So I'll personalise any books that you want to do as gifts, for yourself. And I've also got a book event at Waterstones in the shopping centre. Just forgive me, the one is the shopping centre. Castle Point, thank you so much. Forgive me, Waterstones. On the 6th of December, following our Chelsea game, I'm going to be there from 5 till 9 at a special book event. So anybody that's got there's going to be Santa there, there's going to be food, there's going to be drinks. So please come along, and there'll be copies of my book. And again, I'll personalise them, write any kind of dedication you want in the book, anything that I can do, to help with Christmas presents. I'm not buying them, you're buying them. Just again for the avoidance of doubt. It's been an honour and a privilege, a humbling experience for me writing a book. And it is, in the book, I've dedicated this to two groups of people. I've dedicated it to my family, first and foremost, and I've dedicated it to my extended family, which is the incredible supporters of AFC Bournemouth. It is dedicated to you.
Yeah, wow. I think that's everything, Jeff.
Well, it's just been, again, an absolute, boys, it's been an honour and a privilege speaking to you both today. Thank you for your incredible support. Thank you for everything you do for the football club. And say the honour has been mine spending time with you today. And you know, we've even gone over a fire drill. We've gone out, we've come back, we haven't changed, and we've continued with the story, and that's a first. But it's really been a privilege being with you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. Thank you.
The TalkSport Fan Network.
The ultimate on-demand destination for the UK's best fan-led football podcasts.
Want authentic supporter insight on all things Bournemouth? Follow Up the Cherries in all departments on the TalkSport Fan Network.
Club-dedicated content created by the fans, for the fans.
Search TalkSport Fan Network.